Today, we're not just diving into the murky waters of the human psyche. We're doing a full-blown cannonball into the deep end. Brace yourselves as we embark on a journey through the shadowy corridors of our minds, courtesy of the Swiss wizard of the unconscious himself, Carl Gustav Jung. You see, Jung wasn't just a guy who looked like he should be selling you antique pocket watches. No, he was a pioneer of psychology, a man who had the audacity to suggest that maybe the reason we're all a bit messed up is because we haven't embraced our dark side. So, let's dive into it. What is the shadow? No, it's not just that thing that follows you around on sunny days. In the world of Carl Jung, the shadow is far more sinister, yet intriguingly profound. Picture the shadow as the mental equivalent of your attic or basement. You know, the place where you stash all the things you don't want guests to see, old trophies, embarrassing photo albums. Except instead of knickknacks, the shadow houses all the traits, desires, and impulses you'd rather not admit to having. According to Jung, the shadow represents the darker aspects of our personality that we hide not only from others, but from ourselves. It's the repository for everything society deems unacceptable or we find personally shameful. Think of it as the subconscious landfill where you dump your guilt, insecurities, and all those bad thoughts you're not supposed to have. It's not necessarily evil. It's more like the unruly guest at the dinner party of your mind, the one who blurts out inappropriate jokes and guzzles wine straight from the bottle. Now let's get something straight. Everyone has a shadow. It's a universal aspect of the human experience. Even that saintly person who rescues stray kittens has a shadow. It's not a sign of moral failing. It's just a part of being human. Our shadows contain everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves: our pettiness, our envy, our aggressive tendencies, and our less than altruistic desires. So, how does the shadow form? Imagine, if you will, a newborn baby, a glorious tiny human bundle of potential, complete with all sorts of impulses, instincts, and desires. But as the baby grows, something insidious starts to happen. Society begins its relentless campaign of conditioning. From a tender age, we're bombarded with messages about what's acceptable and what's not. These lessons are necessary for functioning in a civilized society, but they also come with a price. As we learn to conform to societal expectations, we start to suppress parts of ourselves that don't fit the mold. Those wild, primal urges and unacceptable thoughts, straight into the shadow they go. This process repeats for countless aspects of our personality: lust, greed, selfishness, vanity. Anything deemed inappropriate or undesirable by our family, culture, or society is banished to the shadow. We learn to curate our outward personas, presenting only the socially acceptable parts of ourselves, while the rest gets locked away in the dark corners of our psyche. Over time, we become adept at ignoring our shadow, convincing ourselves that these disowned parts don't exist. But the shadow is still there, lurking, influencing our behavior in ways we don't even realize. The formation of the shadow is a natural part of psychological development. It's how we learn to navigate the world and fit into our communities. But in the process of becoming good and acceptable, we lose touch with our wholeness. We become fragmented, presenting a sanitized version of ourselves to the world, while our shadow grows ever darker and more powerful in the recesses of our mind. To put it another way, the shadow is like a moldy sandwich hidden at the back of the fridge. You can ignore it all you want, but eventually, it's going to start stinking up the place, and the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. Integrating the shadow means acknowledging its presence, taking a good, hard look at what's been festering in the dark, and figuring out how to incorporate these hidden aspects into a more complete, authentic version of yourself. So the shadow is the mental dumping ground for all the parts of ourselves we'd rather not deal with, formed through a lifetime of societal conditioning and self-repression. It's not pretty, but it's an essential part of who we are. And if we want to live fully and authentically, we have to face it head-on, no matter how terrifying or uncomfortable that might be. Jung introduced several key concepts to help us navigate this murky terrain. One of the most important is the idea of individuation. This is the process of integrating all parts of the self, including the shadow, to become a whole and balanced individual. It's about acknowledging and embracing the parts of ourselves we'd rather pretend don't exist. Another crucial concept is projection. This is when we unconsciously project our own unwanted qualities onto others, Ever notice how the traits that annoy you most in other people are often the very things you dislike about yourself? That's projection at work. It's your shadow's way of trying to get your attention by putting on someone else's face. Jung believed that by recognizing and reclaiming these projections, we could start to integrate our shadow and reduce its power over us. Now here's the fun part. Using your shadow to your advantage. Your shadow isn't just a collection of your worst traits. It's also a reservoir of untapped potential. By integrating your shadow, you can access qualities you never knew you had. That anger you've been repressing, it can become assertiveness. That selfishness you've been denying, it can turn into self-respect. Your shadow contains the seeds of your greatest strengths if you're willing to cultivate them. Jung wasn't suggesting that we should all become unhinged lunatics. Quite the opposite. He believed that by integrating our shadow, we could achieve a greater sense of balance and wholeness. Instead of being ruled by our unconscious desires, we could bring them into the light and use them constructively. It's about turning your inner chaos into creativity, your darkness into depth. By accepting and integrating your shadow, you become a more authentic version of yourself. This journey isn't for the faint of heart. It requires a level of self-honesty that's downright brutal. But the rewards are immense. By facing your shadow, you gain a deeper understanding of yourself. You become more resilient, more compassionate, more human. You stop being a fragmented collection of roles and masks and start becoming a unified, integrated person. And in a world that's constantly trying to shape you into something you're not, that's a victory worth fighting for. Now let's talk about the practical steps you can take to start integrating your shadow. First, cultivate self-awareness. This means paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. When you feel a strong emotional response to something, ask yourself why. What does this reaction tell you about your shadow? What are you projecting onto others? By examining your responses, you start to uncover the hidden parts of yourself. Next, practice self-compassion. Integrating your shadow isn't about beating yourself up for having dark thoughts. It's about understanding that these thoughts are a normal part of being human. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer to a friend. Remember, the goal is not to eliminate your shadow, but to integrate it. Engage in reflective practices like journaling or meditation. These activities create a space for you to explore your inner world without judgment. Write about your fears, your desires, your shame. Meditate on your reactions and try to understand where they come from. These practices help you build a relationship with your shadow, turning it from an adversary into an ally. Finally, embrace creative outlets. Art, music, writing. These are all powerful ways to express and explore your shadow. Creative activities allow you to channel your inner turmoil into something beautiful and meaningful. They give form to the formless, making the unconscious conscious. In the end, we're all walking around with shadows trailing behind us. Some of us acknowledge them, some of us deny them, and some of us trip over them every now and then. But the ones who truly thrive are those who turn around, face their shadow, and say, "All right, let's dance." Because when you embrace your shadow, you embrace all of yourself, the good, the bad, and the gloriously human. And that, my friends, is the true path to self-discovery.